The NBA offseason has been one of the many highlights of the NBA world. This is where the players go to break, but the teams, that being the front offices of the league, do their best work. Now it's time for us to examine what major moves were made last year and how they stack up today in the second annual Then and Now offseason video. First up, the Atlanta Hawks and Dallas Mavericks, the Trae Young and Luka Doncic trade. Pretty much A's across the board, sprinkled in with a couple of B's. Even with that, there were a lot of mixed feelings about this trade. Luka had been chosen as the undisputed most qualified player in the draft by everybody, and his draft profile had much to say about that. He was 19 years old and he had already won a championship and MVP on the biggest stage that he was legally able to. The reason he wasn't chosen number 1 or number 2 was because of organizational taste. And then Atlanta has perhaps the steal of the century in the 3rd pick with Luka. Then he was traded for the 5th pick and a top 5 protected 2019 first rounder to the Dallas Mavericks. If Luka was the international household name, then Trae was the national. His 3-point bombs took a comparison to Curry so fast that there wasn't room for anyone else. A 6'2" point guard who can shoot the lights out and has a quick dribble, that's Curry. He's going to be the next Steph. Then February rolls around and defenses start putting up doubts for his future. Coming into the draft, it was unlikely that he was even going to be a top 5 pick, given the amount of questions that teams now had. Will his efficiency improve? Will he be able to get shots off against NBA defenders, etc., etc.? The trade, for the most part, slightly favored the Mavericks. Luka was perfect for the yo-crazy Dallas, and he seemed somewhat out of place as a player for Atlanta. Trae, on the other hand, was essentially guaranteed to increase ticket sales due to his American popularity. Both were prospects projected to have high upsides, but Luka was Luka and Trae was a 6'2", 170-pound point guard that led the NCAA in turnovers last season. So from the fan perspective, it looked pretty rough. Now, however, the narrative has been changed significantly. Both Trae and Luka had astounding rookie seasons with an average of roughly 20 points, 7 assists, and an effective field goal percentage of about 48%. That would win Rookie of the Year in pretty much any season, and Trae's early struggles were the only real reason that Luka was able to win it. While Luka was exceptional from the start, Trae came around later in the season. But when he came around, he came around. Post All-Star break, he averaged 25 points on the plate of 9 assists while leading the Hawks to a 10-11 record in a season where they went 29-52. No other discussions need to be made. This is an A for both teams. Masai Ujiri's Toronto Raptors have been slapped around by LeBron James for about 4 years straight. They'd won 59 games and made it to the second round of the playoffs last year against a LeBron that needed a game winner and 7 games to make it past the first round. They then, as we all know, got swept. The NBA awards came around and gifted Dwayne Casey with Coach of the Year after he was fired.
When you get fired, which I did recently, I don't know if you knew that or not.
That's tough, man. It was obvious that Ujiri wanted change in the organization. Around the same time, the NBA's biggest conspiracy was still to be fully unfolded. Kawhi Leonard had played 9 games in the regular season and showed no inclinations toward any rushed returns. He wanted out of San Antonio, and that was made very public. The Spurs at first didn't want to have to trade him, opting to reconcile with him through Popovich. That didn't work, so then they started listening to suitors, the main ones being the Lakers and the Celtics. However, there was a lot of uncertainty. San Antonio was asking for Josh Hart, Kyle Kuzma, Brandon Ingram, and essentially 4 first-round picks. The Lakers didn't even give that up for Anthony Davis, the guy who didn't miss 72 games due to injury. The Celtics didn't want to give up even Jaylen Brown, so trade talks with them eventually evaporated. So then comes around the week of July 16th, and the Toronto Raptors appear as frontrunners for the Kawhi sweepstakes after multiple reports of Kawhi wanting to play in LA. The Raptors had in their arsenal Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, who at the time seemed untouchable, and bright young players coming from their bench mob. The final trade, being DeRozan, Jakob Poeltl, and a top 20 protected pick, was more than underwhelming. Poeltl had averaged 6 points on the season, and DeRozan wasn't a guy you could really justify trading for Kawhi. But the situation still held, and San Antonio's intentions did as well. They still wanted to compete while trying to rebuild, and the trade value completed that wish, sort of. Value-wise, it was a poor trade, but San Antonio kinda got what they wanted, considering the circumstances. The Raptors, with no question, passed with flying colors. They won a championship, something that looked not very possible in the offseason. And no matter if Kawhi stays or leaves, their team looks strong with the realization of Pascal Siakam and the retention of Marc Gasol. Masai got his chip, and even if they don't go back to the finals, the trade was 110% worth it. The Spurs became a middling team, on the other hand. There isn't much room for growth now, since they still hold DeRozan for another year at $27 million and have a LaMarcus Aldridge that's heading into his 14th season at 34 years of age. While they were my sleeper team for the playoffs, they suffered a tough first-round exit against the Nuggets, and it looks like they won't even be back to the playoffs if the roster stays the same. The team's 3-point guards being injured was a serious shock in the beginning of the season, and it's still possible for them to be a better team than they were last year. But that very likely won't cut it. Of course, they are the Spurs. They might be able to make something work with Sean White and Keldon Johnson, but that remains to be seen. For now, they receive a C.
The answer to the question everybody wants to know. LeBron, what's your decision?
First up, we've got Chris Paul signing to the Rockets for 4 years and $160 million. There aren't really many official grades for free agency signings, which makes sense, but for something like this, you don't need a lot of sources to feel the correctness of this B-. The Rockets were one game away from winning an NBA championship, but their chances were pretty much decimated by their 0-27 showing from three-point land in the absence of Chris Paul. Golden State was at their very peak as a franchise, and Houston almost toppled it. It made so much sense to run it back with the same roster, seeing as all it looked like they had to do was keep Chris Paul healthy. At the same time, however, he was 33 years old and he'd played only 58 games in the regular season. The hamstring injury that he suffered in Game 5 looked to be a serious foreshadowing of what was to come in his career. He was still one of the best point guards in the league, but he wasn't going to stay like that much longer. Even so, Chris Paul was one of the league's most valuable players and the most available to the Rockets at the time. He'd already proven that he took the team to the level that it needed to win a championship, and with a resume that only about 6 players in the league could match, it was pretty much necessary that they re-signed him. As of the 2017-18 season, he was clearly a max player, and he was eligible for the Supermax. The problem was, though, that he would not be a max player at the end of his contract, where he'd be paid the most. A 37-year-old Chris Paul couldn't probably even get $25 million, let alone 46. Now, the trope of injury has been proven yet again. They lost both Trevor Ariza and Luka thanks to the Chris Paul signing, something that really hurt their depth. And it took James Harden's 36-point average season to keep the Rockets afloat. With guys like Danuel House and mid-season pickups like Iman Shumpert, the desperation for 3-and-D showed pretty heavily. Chris Paul missed 5 weeks of the season with a supposed strain in his hamstring, and saw sharp decreases in efficiency in both the regular and postseason. Then comes along Game 5 of the NBA West Finals. Kevin Durant goes down with an injury in the third quarter, and Houston doesn't capitalize. Chris Paul ended the game with 11 points, shooting 3 of 14. The next game, he comes back with 27, sure, but that was way overshadowed by Curry's 33 points in the second half. The point is, Houston's gonna have to deal with the Chris Paul problem even more seriously next year. Instead of missing 5 weeks, he might miss 7 or 8 or 10. Who knows? And it's entirely possible that the 27-point games are only going to diminish from now on. But they're gonna have to keep paying him like a supermax player. They didn't capitalize this year, which brings the Rockets down a letter grade to C-. As for Chris Paul, though, that dude got the bag, you know what I'm saying? That's an A++ in my book. NBA Players Association. LeBron James signing with the Lakers for 4 years, $154 million. Come on now, no sports websites are necessary. LeBron signing to the Lakers was an undisputed A+. The Lakers have been flailing for the past 5 years and they couldn't land a star to save their life. Then LeBron touches down. LeBron James was the NBA's best player for the entirety of the season at 33 years old. He led the worst team that he'd had since 2007 to the championship and almost single-handedly took a game away from one of the best basketball teams to ever exist. The moment he hit free agency, there was a scramble for everybody and anybody to try and get him, and for good reason. LeBron is a player that can change a franchise in a way that perhaps only 5 other players on the entire planet possibly could. With the Lakers ready to spend and LeBron ready to buy in, Los Angeles was ready for contention with last year's young players, who scrapped a top 10 defense together and whatever star free agent they could attract to LA, whether that be Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, or DeMarcus Cousins. LeBron turned the Lakers from a fringe playoff team to a legitimate power in one day. Not only that, but the presence in LA is so much more valuable than anything that he could get in Cleveland. Also, with a sharp turn from the oldest team in the league to one of the youngest, LeBron could relax in the later years in his career and reap the benefits, while making sure that his children grew up used to the pressure that comes with being the child of LeBron James. The Lakers now have the star player that they longed for so badly in Anthony Davis, but at the cost of almost every player. Last year, Los Angeles was on pace to get as high as the 4th seed at Christmas time, and LeBron was living up to expectations happily. Then in the third quarter, LeBron gets injured for the first time since the beginning of 2017, and misses the most time that he's ever had in his career at 17 games. Anthony Davis then pops up in trade rumors around mid-February, and the team chemistry is pretty much gone. They finish as the 10th seed, ending LeBron's streaks of both the finals and the playoffs. Running it back with the same roster could possibly have come with a playoff spot next year, but the acquisition of Anthony Davis puts them in legitimate championship contention. If LeBron had decided to go to another team, it would be a totally different story for the Lakers. So even if they have problems filling out the roster, which it looks like they might, they're set up with a 26-year-old Davis for a good long time. Paul George signs with the Oklahoma City Thunder. 4 years, $137 million. No outside opinions are needed for this one either. After the Thunder were eliminated in the first round by the Utah Jazz, the Paul George era in Oklahoma City looked to be over. Los Angeles was priority number 1 in the offseason, and PG was all about wanting to play there. LeBron was already a heavy favorite to land in LA, and him, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard seemed to be a very real possibility. But reports came out. Paul George, who'd been intertwined with the Lakers since being traded to OKC, wanted to stay and compete for a championship, and he resigns on the very first minute of free agency. Just like that, the Thunder kept a top 10 player in the league after trading for him in what seemed a one-year rental, when it looked like the only option for PG after the loss was to go to LA. This was a major win for Sam Presti and the management staff, as they took a year with a player dead set on leaving the team when he got there, underperformed, and were still able to keep him. Without a doubt, that's an A+. Paul George, on the other hand, skipped on his chance to play with LeBron James and to play back in his hometown. The Thunder literally went through a first-round exit 2 months before, and Russell Westbrook was the same player that he'd been for the past 3 years. From an outsider standpoint, PG was signing up to be cramped by Russ for another 4 years, which isn't a good thing if you're trying to win championships. B-. Paul George became a top 5 player in the 2018-19 season. He was a super defensive stopper, perhaps the best in the league, and finished on 28 points a game. The Thunder nearly won 58 games, and all but 12 of them came before Paul George's injury, where they fell off a cliff as PG dealt with shoulder pain for the rest of the season. If Paul George can get back to full health and become yet again a top 3 MVP and Defensive Player of the Year candidate, then the Thunder, even after underperforming yet again in the playoffs, still ace the free agency test. As for Paul George, the team has shown that they can be legitimate contenders with PG at the first option and Russ in a secondary role. With the Golden State Warriors in reach for the first time since 2016, Oklahoma City has one of its best chances to go for it all right now. The alternative, however, had he signed with the Lakers, would have been a direct chance at forming a super team with LeBron and either AD, Kawhi, Kemba, or Kyrie. However, this scenario isn't bad in the slightest. Okay, it's about 10:40 a.m. I woke up like an hour ago. I learned about the news last night at like 1 or 2 a.m. So of course I've got to make a revision to the offseason grades now. But for me, I feel the Thunder are still at an A+. They were able to turn Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis into 7 first-round picks, plus Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Danilo Gallinari. That's a pretty big haul for 2, at the time, role players. As for Paul George, that's not no A-, that's an A++ in my book now. He's competing for championships for real now. DeMarcus Cousins signs with the Warriors, 1 year, $5.3 million. The NBA world pretty much went crazy for this one. DeMarcus Cousins, the player who'd been a top 3 center and arguably one of the league's top 10 players before injury, was signing to the most star-studded roster in recent sports memory. I mean, I don't remember this happening. I was watching a Summer League game, and in the corner of my eye, and scrolling on the bottom, I saw DeMarcus Cousins to the Warriors. My eyes went back to the game, and then I thought about what it said, and I went crazy, man. There was no downside for the Warriors or for DeMarcus. Golden State got a sorely needed upgrade at center, and DeMarcus had a chance to showcase his skills and get a free ring along the way. Even if DeMarcus would come back at 70 or even 60%, it would be miles better than what they had before. Also, as DeMarcus' agent said, it was chess, not checkers. DeMarcus would be able to pad up his historical resume, show teams that hadn't wanted to offer him more than the mid-level exception that he still had it, and enjoy one of basketball's greatest cultures ever. Yeah, DeMarcus didn't get that free ring.
That's tough, man.
He was coming along smoothly in the end of the regular season, but then suffered a big injury to his quad against the Clippers. He came back during the finals, and he showed that he could be somewhat effective still on offense. But his defense told a completely different story. Golden State preferred Kevon Looney or Jordan Bell quite a bit more than DeMarcus, and for good reason. They were leaps and bounds ahead of him when it came to mobility, and with an offense that has Steph and Clay, extra offensive power from the blocks aren't what you're looking for primarily. That being said, Golden State had nothing to lose with signing Cousins, and he didn't hurt the team in a way that could cause you to blame them for their loss. But it was apparent that he wasn't the same DeMarcus Cousins that we've seen before, and teams are very likely wary about his now prolific injury history. As for DeMarcus, the season just didn't roll his way. He didn't get as much playing time as he could have for the Pelicans or the Lakers, but he was able to play in the NBA Finals. That's a privilege no matter how much you contribute to the wins or losses. He wouldn't be able to do that anywhere else. So even if he showed more of his talent somewhere else, it wouldn't be as attractive as the experience that he now has. Even so, he did get injured and put up subpar numbers. He won't get a max next year, and his prime years are waning. If stardom is a priority for him, he'll have to take another year to prove that he's capable of consistency yet again. Golden State A+, DeMarcus B. Alright, that's the end of the second annual.
Whoa, slow down, buckaroo. You're telling me there's no market for DeMarcus Cousins?
Yeah, that's C. That's C- right there.
That's tough, man.
Alright, that's the end of the second annual Then and Now video. Thank you guys for the continued support, and if you liked the video, do the obvious thing. We'll be back.